Every single action that we take has some kind of risk. If you build a building in a specific architecture, you're going to have some kind of fire risk. What is the level of risk that is acceptable and at what cost? And that's what we're trying to figure out. And I think different people have different answers to this. And
All right, welcome back to Untitled Planning. I'm Sammy.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Majd.
Majd today is our special guest, and we're gonna get right into it. You ready?
Yalla, let's
do it. First segment. Tell us who you are, Majd. Your origin story, where you come from. How did you become who you are?
It's a big question. I mean, I'm 35 years old, so it's not a lot of years, but at the same time, quite a bit of years.
Yeah.
So origin story. I mean, I grew up in Damascus, in Yarmouk camp, in the Palestinian refugee camp in Syria, and that place, as an urban planner, it just shaped my view of what an urban place should look like. It's a lot of closed, very tight-knit communities. We're very close to each other. In a way, it's very walkable. So that's like the formation of my, the background of my origins. And then I immigrated to Canada with my family when I was 15. To Kitchener, and I studied engineering after graduating from high school. It was a very struggleful, let's say, first few years. I did something called systems design engineering, which is like the jack of all trades, master of none of engineering. I did that. It took me 7 years to finish my 5-year undergrad. It was a little bit of struggle as well. And then I was like, okay, I need to understand what the world looks like beyond just the refugee camp and suburban Kitchener. My partner lived in Italy, or lives in Italy, so I went to live in Italy for a while. I couldn't find work there. It's a struggle to find jobs there. So I did like a lot of young Italians do. So I moved to Berlin. I lived in Berlin for a couple of years. That was super interesting. I moved to Berlin actually because I knew that school is for free, even for international students, and I wanted to study something related to urban planning. And I found I found a few programs, but all of them were either studying European cities or studying Middle Eastern cities from an international development perspective, and neither of those I was interested in. After I lost my job, at some point in 2016, and I just was doing some contract work, and I found an organization in Beirut that invited me over to Lebanon to do to curate a 10-day summer camp, at the intersection of art, technology, and politics. And that was very pivotal for me because it allowed me to drift away a little bit from engineering culture and move into art and see how art can be expressed through technical projects. And then it also just put me in a position where I was curating something, and that was really interesting. And through that, I met a few urbanists in Beirut who invited me to stay there. And I applied for the urban planning program at the American University of Beirut, and I was like, it was a very interesting program because it mixed a lot of very rigorous intellectual and theory-based understanding of the city with the practical, on-the-ground reality of urbanism in a country where law is not as respected as we'd like it to be. So it kind of presented all of these challenges that our urban planners face at a much more complex and nuanced like way. So that's I learned a lot through that program because yeah, it's just threw us in the deep end kind of thing. And yeah, and I finished the program in 2020 and came back to Canada and started this PhD. I'm a PhD student now.
What? One mic, we're broke. But so you said before you did the jump from engineering to where you are now. What was the reason for you to go into engineering from the start?
Well, I was always like interested in technology. At the end of high school, I was like, what are my career options? I really hated the idea of doing like civil engineering or something like that, and especially because I noticed that my dad's trained as a civil engineer and hated it. Even though he was practicing as a civil engineer, he hated it, and I was like, I don't want to be that. But I'm still interested in technology. I'm still interested in how technology operates. I got kind of involved in like open source culture, so I was like forcing my parents to install Ubuntu, like Linux, on their desktop. I was, yeah, like at the time we were like, you couldn't just download it from the internet. You'd have, like, we had to order CDs from South Africa, from Canonical, the company that operates Ubuntu, that like, is the custodian of Ubuntu. And we'd install it from CDs. It was kind of intense. And yeah, so it was, I really liked the culture of open source, open culture. I was a little bit involved in Wikipedia at the time as well. And I wanted to see how like I could utilize like technology in things that were interesting to me. I didn't have the words to express it. So like I was still like very young, I was like 17, 18, 19. I didn't like, and especially because my English wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, but it was, I knew that there was something political about the way that technology was being exercised, and I wanted to kind of explore that a little bit further. So systems design was like, from the description that I was given from university recruiters, was very interesting because it was about understanding the world as a system. And something about that description kind of clicked with me, and it wasn't super specialized, so we take a little bit of courses from every kind of engineering discipline, and that attracted me. It's like I'm more of a generalist than a specialist, so yeah. And then you want, and then I was like, when I finished systems, I remember like I was doing my final year project, and I was talking to like the professor who was supervising my group, and I was like there's the one thing I learned in the past few years of doing this program is that I don't know anything. Like the more I learn, the less I know. And so I was thinking, okay, like when I graduated, like how am I going to apply all of this knowledge that I started getting my hands on? And I started thinking, because of my travel to a lot of places, I started comparing the urban fabrics of those different places. And and I decided that, like, I realized that like the city is a system, and you can apply all of these things about systems that we learned directly onto the city. And that's why I was interested in doing urban planning. As a specialization in my master's. So you went from Waterloo, you did your engineering in Waterloo, correct? Yes. You go from Waterloo, your whole adventure, and then to Lebanon. Yes. So why did you decide not to do your degree in Canada for planning? Well, I did apply for McGill urban planning, and I was not accepted. Like the rest of us. Then there's Alex, you got accepted. Oh my God, you're special. Also, like, I think part of the reason was that, so at the beginning of my undergrad, I did my first year. I had really good marks. My second year, I did really, really badly, and I realized later on that it was like an undiagnosed learning disability. So once I got that diagnosed, it kind of my marks started going up.
Yeah.
But it took a little bit, like it took a year and a half for that to happen. Gotcha. So that brought my average down, and I think it made it more difficult for me to be admitted into a program. So what I did is that I did all of this like interesting career stuff that would make it more tempting and more interesting for an admissions committee to accept me. And when I applied for AUB, the American University of Beirut, I went to the professor and I just like basically begged her to give me a chance, who was on the admissions committee. I think she was like, I tried to explain to her about the learning disability and so on, and she took that into account, and awesome. she took a chance on me, and I really appreciate that of her.
Awesome. So now you're at the University of Toronto, UofT?
Yes, I am. It's money.
UofT, PhD in geography.
Yes.
Geography. You want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah.
Your current state?
Yes. So I just finished my second year, so I'm about to start my third year in like a few days. That's when the term starts. My project kind of evolved through some of my past professional work. So I've been doing a lot of participatory mapping. I've been involved in OpenStreetMap community. I don't know if the audience knows OpenStreetMap, but it's basically like the Wikipedia of maps. So it's like Google Maps, but created by everyone who wants to contribute to it.
Right.
So I've been like I ran mapathons in Beirut where we tried to like add more data to OpenStreetMap, and I noticed that there was something really interesting happening in those mapathons. People were starting to feel more ownership of the map. People were thinking critically about what the map actually means, and those participatory actions and their intersection with technology became more and more interesting to me. My master's project was around a question that was very much on the surface of urban planning discourse in Beirut, which was around the vacancy tax. So Beirut has like a massively high vacancy rate, mostly because like 23%.
Housing. Housing vacancy.
Yeah. Sorry, housing vacancy. So yeah, housing is a big issue in Beirut, and within that, the vacancy rate is like a very stark topic. So people have been trying to think about ways of overcoming this vacancy rate. And a lot of people were proposing a vacancy tax. So what I was trying to do is to understand, like, what could we do about vacancy from a practical perspective. So I built, my master's project was to build a simulation model, a computer simulation using a technique called agent-based modeling. And I built the simulation of the housing market and the sale market in Beirut. Which is something that you don't see often. Most of the housing simulations are either rent or sale. Very few. There's a few of them that like mix the two, but not a lot. So what I did was to build this model, and as I was building it, I had a lot of questions, and I was realizing I was making a lot of assumptions that may or may not be warranted. And that was actually a critique that I received in my thesis defense. So, and the conclusion chapter of my master's thesis was a list of like 40 different questions that I wanted to respond to in the next iteration of the project. So, I decided, okay, that's what I'm going to do. In my PhD, I got admitted actually based on a very different program, a very different project. I wanted to do something related to mapathons and another project that I've been working on called Palestine Open Maps. If you go to palopenmaps.org, you can see all of these maps that I've compiled in collaboration with my partner in the project, Ahmed Barkley, and Visualizing Palestine. We compiled maps of Palestine that were made by the British colonial authorities in the 30s and 40s of Palestine, and we put them online in a really accessible way. And I ran mapathons to extract data out of them. So again, the same question about like ownership of data, ownership of archival material, extraction methods. How do the methodologies of extracting data affect the political nature or the political relation between the participants and the project. So all of these questions came into my project, and they intersected with my modeling project. I was like, okay, how can I merge the two? And I ended up doing this current project that I'm working on, which is going to be, it's still a work in progress. I'm at the early stages, but the core question that I'm trying to ask is, we have all of this research around how housing is a climate solution. How can we change the urban fabric in a way that has benefits for social benefits, but also environmental benefits. But to me, it seems like that's not being reflected in the municipal climate action plans. So if you look at TransformTO, there's a building strategy, there's a waste strategy, there's a transportation strategy, there's a natural landscape strategy, but all of them stitched together are not there's no coherence between those strategies. And for me, housing is a cross-cutting lens that links transportation with buildings, with landscapes, with waste management. So I was asking questions. So I had this question, why is this idea about housing as a climate solution not making its way into the climate action plan? And part of my reasoning, after I did a little bit of digging, is that the models that the City of Toronto uses don't have that element of the cross-cutting element. They're mostly basically energy and carbon accounting models.
You said TransformTO, that's the City of Toronto's climate action plan. Go check it out.
It's really
just
cool.
For context.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's very ambitious. It's like net zero by 2040. It's super ambitious. 10 years earlier than the Paris Agreement goal of net zero by 2050. Yeah.
But sorry, I was going to ask, because you talked about housing being a climate solution, but just for context, can you unpack that more?
Yeah. So it's super interesting. So if you look at the way that we structure our cities, we build the urban fabric of our cities, at least in Toronto, let's say, I'm going to take Toronto as an example. We have
Ontario, Canada.
Exactly.
Just for the 3 international viewers.
We have 2 types of housing. We either have super high-rise buildings, 50 stories and higher, or you have single-family homes, and if each one of them presents a few different social, environmental, political, financial problems. First, the high-rise buildings are impossible to exist without an extremely large amount of energy input. Whether it's for air conditioning or climate control in general, for heating. You need elevators to run them. You need them to be. You need security systems. There is a lot that needs to be actively maintained about those buildings in order to keep them functioning. On the other hand, you have those single-family homes that force us into car dependence. And they're generally not built at, like especially the newer models, they're not built at a high enough energy efficiency because we assume that there's going to be forever cheap energy. There are building codes that are kind of being implemented that limit this quality, but it's still a real problem. And for me, one of the worst things that happen because of the single-family home urban fabric is that people just are forced to be far from each other. And then it structures the life of each individual in a way that forces them to separate from an urban fabric. So you don't know your neighbors as well as you would, or if you do, you know like the one neighbor on each side of your house. Yeah. Whereas if you were living in a medium density housing, you would know like at least like a few neighbors plus your local neighborhood shops and so on. So what this creates is car dependency, which also like there's so much of the infrastructure, like so much of the surface area of a neighborhood becomes just infrastructure for transportation. You can see that like let's go to Scarborough and look at how much of the how everyone is in cars and there's nothing like people who are on walking, they're having a very unpleasant experience. Right. And all of that just it creates a lifestyle that requires a lot of energy input and a lot of carbon consumption, basically. So can we structure the urban fabric of our neighborhoods to be less car dependent and at the same time be less dependent on energy input for maintenance of buildings? So looking at things like the passive house standard, which uses a lot of actually thousands of years of experience in maintaining building very energy efficient buildings, uses that for as an inspiration for what to do today, how to build today. So yeah, so I'm thinking about all of these, housing as a climate solution, because it takes all of these different elements and merges them together, but then also making sure that we don't build a system where sustainability is only for the rich, right? Yeah. Because it's very easy to slip into that. So there's also some kind of financial justice that needs to be taken into account. So how do you finance retrofits? How do you finance the construction of medium density housing? How do you finance, for example, the businesses that need to start up to serve a community that's medium density? How do you make sure that there is daycare available so that parents can go to work and not have their children alone, basically, or something? Yeah.
It's awesome. Yeah. So with your PhD currently, you shifted slightly away with the mapping stuff to more housing sustainability, or how housing can impact environmental sustainability.
Yes, and I'm also thinking about how do the models affect the decision making in City Hall. Awesome. So I'm trying to build alternative models with the community, with the communities that are being the recipients of TransformTO plans.
Models for
computer simulations.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm building computer simulations, and I'm asking people to tell me what the computer simulation should do. Okay. What do they think that the neighborhood should behave like? What are the decision-making rules within the model? And then I want to compare that to the model that the city presents. And ultimately, what I would like to do is to say that there's a long history of models and counter models being built. So back in the 70s, when like the first alarms around climate change were being raised, there were like a bunch of scientists who were saying like, yeah, this is real. Like here, this is what our computer simulations tell us is going to happen if we just continue on the consumption patterns that we are doing. And there are other people who are saying, actually, we should wait until we have more evidence. So they were like the people who were like saying we should wait, which are eventually the people that won on the short term. Like now everyone says, yeah, climate change is a thing. But at the time it was much more difficult. And the people who said like we're building computer simulations that were saying, actually, like these are the real consequences. And you can go, like you can see there's the World 3 model, it was called, from the Club of Rome. That was warning about overpopulation. It was very much criticized for it having inaccurate content or like inaccurate simulation parameters and so on. Right. But there's all of this culture of building models and counter models, and I'm thinking, okay, can we build models like from the community that counter the narrative that the city is presenting, so we can demand more urgent radical action. Okay. So within that long history of building counter models, there's also this question of like, what is the agency, the political agency of people building models? Right. There's like they fit into like a big landscape of political actors who are each like trying to animate the city in different ways. Right. And what I would like to say is that, and this is also inspired from the open source movement that I was mentioning at the beginning, is that people have the right to model and to create models that will eventually shape the city that they're in. And
informative models.
Yeah, computer simulations. Like you have to be able to build the computer simulations that you are going to be that are going to affect your life, because policymakers make decisions based on those computer simulations. And what I want to do is to extend that kind of a little bit further and say, like, in the same way that we have the right to model, we have the right to the city, which is like a very established like urban planning theory. I want us to say like the right to model is a part of the right to the city.
Right to the city is established by.
Oh, you mean like who established it?
Yeah. Cool. Okay, that's awesome. So got more to say on this segment? You're good?
Yeah.
We can talk forever, but
yeah.
All right. So I guess where do you see yourself essentially in the future, or with your PhD? Like, how do you see it shaping? Where do you see yourself as a like a member of society, as a planner, or as a geographer?
Yeah, I would love, like, honestly, I really like teaching, and I would like research, so I would love to be in the university. I have a love-hate relationship with academia, but that love is winning more than hate these days. So I'd like to stay in academia and like be in interaction with like a very practical way of doing research, like being in the field often, building connections with the community, and that's what participatory planning, participatory modeling is all about, right? Yeah. So I would like to continue that line, and if that, the academic job market is very difficult. So if that doesn't succeed, then I'm happy to also go into like civil service, probably, like, I don't know, work for the Ministry of Housing or something. Right.
And I guess the next question for you is, you've done so many different things and you're like kind of not straddling the edge. You mix them together, the world of like geography, but then also planning, which we can relate to because we also studied geography and also planning. But they're still like interrelated. Yeah. like even the department we're all from is literally geography and planning. But anyway, for geographers or planners or whatever in between, what advice do you have for them? Like for people trying to come into either one of these fields, because like I think your kind of career path is a testament to how interrelated they are, and then opportunities that open up. Like since I've met you, I've learned so much about like what you can apply all these different tools to in different ways that we don't necessarily learn about in school. Yeah. So I think, any advice or tips?
Yeah. Well, like one thing that, like if you think about it, geography and planning are so related because, in the same way that math and engineering are related, you know, like engineering is just applied math, and planning is just applied geography.
Yeah.
But I think like it's really important for planners to learn from the methods of geography, there's a lot of patience that is required from planners and from geographers as well. So I think these are like qualities that are really important. One thing I'm really interested in is making sure that people spend a lot of time on the ground with people who are dealing with urban issues. So back when I was doing my master's in urban planning, one of the most valuable learning experiences was just attending community meetings around, there was this big conflict in one neighborhood in Beirut between the bars and the residents, because the bars were loud and they would stay up until late, and in a very, very rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. So it was this big conflict, and I was trying to mediate between them. And which was particularly difficult being a Palestinian Syrian in Lebanon, and the Lebanese have problems with both Palestinians and Syrians. So obviously a generalization, but in the neighborhood that I was in.
We can attest though. We both can attest.
So it was, it was very interesting to just be in the position of a planner who's also identity-wise is in a very tricky position, but trying to fit themselves into a certain power dynamic between the bars and the residents. So this kind of experience taught me so much more about planning than any class would have. And I encourage anyone to just seek out examples of this and attend community planning meetings and consultations and so on, just to see what it looks like and see conflict in real life and try to think about conflict resolution in more practical ways.
In summary, we got a Syrian, Palestinian, Syrian.
Yes,
both. Planner, geographer, engineer, studied Lebanon, Canada, worldwide. Mr. Worldwide, 905. The original Pitbull.
About the International Building Code.
International building codes.
I swear it's not as boring as it sounds.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about building codes and internationally. Majd, start us off. What are
All right. So I didn't realize how funny this is until someone on Twitter tagged me in a reply to someone who was saying who was making fun of the fact that the Wikipedia article on the International Building Code has a controversy section, and within that controversy section, there's the double loaded corridor, which is a section that I wrote. So I didn't realize it was funny until people started making fun of it. But it's a pet peeve of mine that it's been brewing in my heart for very long. In the International Building Code, which is basically the regulation that a lot of countries use, including Canada, for it's a building code. It regulates how buildings should look like, materials, structure, envelope, etc. In it, there's this one requirement, which is called the double egress requirement. So it means that every housing unit, in any building that's longer than 2 or 3 stories, if I remember correctly, has to have two exits. That means And that's a requirement for fire. So you need to have 2 fire escapes. In case one is not usable, you have to use that. You can use the other. So what that means is that the architectural plan of every like high-rise building is very extremely restricted by this requirement. Basically the ultimate outcome of this is that you have a design, an architectural design called the double-loaded corridor, where you have one corridor with a staircase on each end and housing units on each side of the corridor. And you've seen this. This is like the setting for a lot of horror movies where you have someone just running down a corridor. It's really horrifying. I remember when I first moved to Canada, we lived in one of those buildings that have a double-loaded corridor, and it was really, really, really like upsetting to us. And we didn't realize why it was so upsetting. But like the more I got deeper into it, I realized, oh, okay, this is why. Right. So what happens if you have this double-loaded corridor is that you have units on each side. Each one of those units cannot be too large, because otherwise it can't have more than 2 bedrooms, because otherwise it will just take up too much of the floor, and then you would lose unit size in the building. If you're optimizing for like the number of units, you cannot have more than 2 bedrooms in a unit. And then what it also means is that the units become very deep, because you want to kind of you can only have one corridor basically. Otherwise, you're losing too much space in the building for the corridors. And then if you have a really deep unit, it also means that you need big windows. Because you want to let as much lighting into the apartment as possible. But you can only have windows on one side of the building, because the other side of the unit is the corridor, and then the right and the left side are other units, unless you live in a corner apartment. So it means that you have like one side with windows, and they have to be really big windows, which are also extremely energy inefficient. We know that glass, no matter how well you insulate it, it's still going to be less efficient in insulation than a wall. And then it also means that you have balconies that are very restricted in size. It means that because you don't have windows on both sides of a housing unit, you can't have cross ventilation. So it means you're dependent on air conditioning and climate control for like maintaining the temperature of an apartment. And this was like, again, when we first came to Canada, this was a very big thing for us, because growing up in Syria, we have always had open windows that we would we'd open in the summer and we let the air through. But that when we came to Canada, and like my dad would we hear we'd cook something and the fire alarm goes off, and everyone is in panic. What is this thing? What is the fire alarm? And my dad would open the window and open the apartment door and then it's just a corridor with no place for the air to pass through, right? And then we'd have the superintendent coming to us and like getting really upset at us and like saying racist things to those new immigrants, you know?
As they do.
As they do. So it was, and then like it's a conflict that's completely unnecessary, that's caused by this very awkward requirement for like 2 exits from one apartment. Of course, it's really important to have like fire plans and emergency plans in case of fire, but like death rates from fire in North America, which uses the International Building Code, are higher than they are in, let's say, Europe, where they don't have the double egress requirement. So you can have a 5-10-story building with one, like they call it, what is it called? Like a single entrance, basically. That like is well insulated and is fire resistant, and and then you can also build the fire services in a way that is able to reach 5 or 6 or 10 stories up, instead of having to rely on the double loaded corridor. And there's all of these like social consequences to having for this one requirement that could be circumvented in other ways.
So what's the conspiracy behind this?
I don't know, it's the developers.
I feel like there's a conspiracy. It's like when it's not double ended, there's no problem. Because, anyways, please hire me. Interesting.
I think what was interesting, or correct me if I'm wrong, well, if I understood correctly, you were saying that it limits the size of the amount of units bedrooms per unit.
Yeah. So it means also families cannot live in those buildings.
Yeah.
Like if you have let's say you have 2 children, where are those 2 children gonna stay? Or if you work from home and you want an office, you can't have a home office. Yeah. So then it forces people to go to single-family homes in the suburbs.
We have reached the conspiracy. We don't want density. All right, interesting. And you were saying before we started recording that it creates almost like discrimination towards not discrimination, but it forces people to have one building typology.
Yeah.
This creates a problem with community building at the same time too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, for example, one of the really important things as a child is to have a place where you can play, where it feels enclosed, right? And this was very present for me because growing up, we had we call it Al-Hara, our street, where all of the kids from the neighborhood would come down to the street and we'd play in the street together. But that's one dangerous because it's there's cars and it's and there isn't enough eyes on the street that kind of maintain surveillance, let's say, of the social surveillance of the place. So when you have a double loaded corridor, you have very tall, wide buildings, but it's called point access block. If you were able to have a point access block building with a single entrance, a single staircase, you can build the building in you can have a perimeter block. So you have 3 sides of the building that enclose a playing space or a social space for the families, for the kids, for other people who want to just have an open space that's semi-private, semi-public.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think the city of Toronto, I think, has these growing up guidelines about towers, realizing that there's so many families now living just because of affordability and just the way things are designed. People living in a tower community, so basically living in a lot of high rises. But then I think there's guidelines about specific guidelines for how buildings of this nature should be built or can be redesigned to think about youth and you're talking about making space for play and making space for those social opportunities to happen. Yeah. And I think that was one of them actually that I thought was interesting in reading through it was the C shape of the building and allowing for that. But I guess knowing now what I know about the International Building Code, there might be a reason why.
Yeah, it makes it difficult. I mean, it's not impossible. There are buildings that take that kind of shape, but it's not. It makes it just so much more difficult. Yeah. And all of those buildings that I know of are built in the 70s.
How would you describe? So you said when you came from Syria to here, you were these double, they suck. This is not it. I hate my life, right? How would you describe your living situation before, where it was your perception of it being better, of course, but how do you describe it?
Obviously, it's a refugee camp, so. But the Yarmouk, before it was destroyed in the war, it was actually it's not what you think of as a refugee camp. It's it's fairly well built. like 4-story buildings everywhere. It's not like they don't look finished in a way because you don't have enough money to finish the buildings. But more recently, like in the 90s, 2000s, people started adding finishes to the buildings as they made more money. It then became like the financial, or not the financial, but the commercial, one of the commercial centers of Damascus. It was actually very like expensive real estate eventually it became. But like my neighborhood was actually like kind of the equivalent of a cul-de-sac. Like it was a dead-end street in a relatively quiet part of the neighborhood. And our building was the last building in that dead-end street. So yeah, I knew all of my neighbors by name. Like there were 10 units in our building. I knew every single neighbor. I knew all of their children. And the same for like the 2-3 buildings next to us. And like, yeah, it was very easy to go for, like it's I don't know, less than 5-minute walk to go for, like to get to every kind of shopping that you would want. And that's something that I try to replicate here. It's like I don't want to get in a car to do, I don't know, the most basic shopping or income.
It's like interesting how it's like in Toronto it's like a city, right? Like it's a city, but like the impact of, how do you say, like building typology, like the impact that building typology has on how it feels. Like there's urban isolation. Yeah. Right? Like there's a big discussion surrounding urban isolation, the impact on mental health, even physical health, community and whatnot. But then we're thinking about there for sure is multiple factors that play into urban isolation, but like typology, how the building is developed for quote unquote safety reasons, even though it's like destroying your internal self because you feel like you're living between prison walls, you know, like that's an intro in itself of just like the impact of urban typology or like physical typology on how much it can impact. Like, oh, I can just walk across the street, and it's funny because we're sitting in a whole gallery talking about mixed use development and like, oh, what happens if we have this on top of this? What would it do? And interesting.
Yeah, and like. It's like there's an exercise that we have to do all the time about like risk management. And we learned that during COVID, like queer people learned that during the AIDS crisis. Like every single action that we take has some kind of risk. If you build a building in a specific architecture, you're gonna have some kind of fire risk. What is the level of risk that is acceptable and at what cost? And that's what we're trying to figure out. And I think different people have different answers to this. And for example, how much should we mandate shutdowns, like during pandemics? Like, there's a point where a shutdown is doing more harm than good. So what is the answer to this? And there needs to be kind of a discussion, like that's empathetic to the needs of the people who are most at need and most vulnerable, but at the same time is not sacrificing like the mental well-being and the health and the livelihoods of other people. And that applies whether it's to like COVID restrictions or to like building codes and how we like specify how many like fire exits are there for a building. You know?
Very true. Yeah. I lost my train of thought. I did have I was thinking, like, how did you even come across this
building code thing?
Well, why did you even write a Wikipedia section on it? It's like,
I'm a Wikipedia editor, so I always edit on Wikipedia. Like whenever I come across something interesting, I look up the Wikipedia article on it. If that little tidbit is not in the article, I just add it because I can. Yeah. It's fun. It's really fun to edit Wikipedia.
Agreed. I got banned on editing. All right.
What did you vandalize?
Well, I think going back to what you're saying about like urban isolation and how our cities, have been designed and you're talking about risk management and then the consequence of it. And I think that's the most, I think, powerful part or important part to understand about, like, when you're talking about planning or city building or all these codes, is that the consequences, you put them in place now, or whatever risks you think are risks at the moment, you feel them later on down the road. Like a lot of all these decisions that were made, I don't know when, but now we're feeling them in the culmination of what we're talking about, like urban isolation. That's a growing issue across a number of different age ranges and a number of different contexts. But yeah, the decisions you make in planning or in general, just when it comes to city building, have impacts that will go beyond what people might imagine them to be. And like we're talking about mental health in the context of like the built form as well. So yeah, I think it's interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like we underestimate the impact of urban design on mental well-being. Yeah. Like, just have trees. Like what? Like trees will just make you happy.
Truly.
Like, but how can we add more trees if we're like dedicating our spaces to cars?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I doubt when they were developing those building codes, they were like, how is this going to impact the liveliness of people?
Yeah. And that's why I want to do like participatory planning or participatory like design and modeling. It's like, actually, can we get the opinion of the people who will be impacted by this thing?
Very true.
And I find that with planning, I feel like that's like the simplest fix. Like, I feel like I do a lot of, I guess, these kind of interviews for my own podcast for what we're doing now. And
Urban Limitrove.
Yes, Urban Limitrove, check it out. But yeah, a lot of interviews for this and other types of work. And I feel like, honestly, the base response that people have, like whether it's like building charter cities, which is another episode you should check out, whether it's talking about like building codes and all these different things, like the core answer to all of them is literally just talk to people. So like people listening, just like ask. You'll be like, that's half the work is done. And people have a lot of the time the solutions. Yeah.
It's like kind of why we also started this platform where it's like people don't even know their impact on the city. Like they don't know the functions of their city and how they're developed, how they're built. And it's like, if I think even us as planners or like geographers or anyone that really works in how cities change, we don't even do a very good job at like, how do you say, like be a insta influencer of just like, this is what you need to know about your city. Like even the other day, like my friend asked me, he's like, why do we have a housing problem? And I was just like,
where do I start?
Well, he was like, is it just the material thing? Like, do we lack materials? I'm like, well, it's like a part of. And then I like listed off like 10 major like elements of why we have elements. Yeah. Anyways, and I'm just like, we get so deep into it, like as planners or professionals, that we forget that the average person is just assuming it's all because of like a variable. And it's not something that we can actually like maybe force the hand a little bit to make it better, or like be a part of to make it better as a community, not just, because it's really easy to go like, it's a material thing, we can't do anything about it, right? But it's really not a material thing, or it's, and I'm using this as an example, but this applies to many things, like, it's an economic problem due to whatever, but it's not that variable only. It's like is the formula broken? Is the system not? I don't want to say broken, but it's like,
I mean, it is broken. It is like there are.
I mean, I'm just trying to be careful. But
I mean, just look at Toronto. Everyone like there's so many unhappy people, and so many people are leaving. Yeah. Like a city that doesn't care if doesn't take care of its people. Yeah. That forces them to leave it is a broken city.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say that.
Yeah. No, you're true, and no, you're right. And it's Alex and I within our like group chat and our work group chat, we always send like these same reels that we see of like immigrants are like, I'm gonna head back home, right? It's like I'm gonna go back to like Ukraine. I'm gonna go back to Syria. I'm gonna go back here. And like I have family friends, or I know people that have left back to areas that are on the media or like by the average person might seem to be worse off than where we are, but the people that came there, they're like, we're heading back. This is hard, like it hurts. Like it's not even like, oh, it's harder or whatever. It just hurts. Like it's not. It creates like this mental pain and physical pain and ailments and whatever, all these problems. And so it's very unfortunate. Yeah. Well, The rant is over. We're not gonna.
Now you know.
Now you know. Double
Loaded corridors.
Double loaded corridors.
Say that 10
Yeah. Thank you, Majd.
Welcome.
Alex, you got any last final comments?
No, just thank you for your insights about this. I didn't know, it's something I didn't know about, but now, yeah.
Now you do. Edit the Wikipedia article.
Well.
You're good this time.
All right. Like, subscribe, check us out. Instagram, Twitter, our website that's still being developed. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Majd.
You're welcome.
Find him at...
On my website, majdal.cc.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Oh.